Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us all today on our webinar on the topic of Lockbox for SXE and CloudSuite distribution. My name is Julie Zindel, and I'm the VP of Client Experience here at Central Data. We're bringing these informative webinars to you on a regular basis throughout this year as a value-added benefit to our clients. Next month on June 8th, we'll present on another topic, and that will be doing cycle counts. So please watch for the opportunity to register for that session. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Please note that we have clients attending today who are on various levels of SXE, Web UI on-premise, and CloudSuite distribution. We will be showing the web user interface only, and we are working in the cloud, which has the latest updates applied each month. So that means we are always on the latest version. The lines will be muted until our Q&A times at the end, but if you have a question, please put it into the chat or in the questions section of the meeting. I will be monitoring the chats as they come in. I'd like to introduce you today to Anna Swenson. Anna is one of our senior level financial consultants. She provides consulting and training for both SXE and CloudSuite distribution. She spends a great deal of her time assisting our support team as well, helping our clients with solving out of balance issues, digging into accounting process questions, and she provides valuable advice regarding best practices. She has been instrumental in the success of many of our CloudSuite and AP automation projects. So with that, I think we have almost everyone logged in. So Anna, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, fantastic. That's quite an introduction. Thank you, Julie. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Happy Wednesday. Try to make sure I'm on the right day. We're here to talk about AR Lockbox. And, you know, this isn't necessarily a new concept to SXE and CSD, right? Graphical does have an AR Lockbox process that can be added to the system. In CSD, we carry forward that process, and then they've also kind of metamorphed it into a CSD process as well with the XML bod. So today we're going to talk about just kind of what Lockbox means as far as processes go. We're going to talk about the difference between that EDI flat file process versus what CloudSuite is kind of adopting with their ION backbone and the XML bods that can come in. So a couple different ways we can receive that information. And then just the process itself. What does it kind of look like? Obviously, we're not going to touch every single scenario, but hopefully I can give you a good idea of just how it might help improve processes. So here we go. So Lockbox functionality. Generally speaking, it's usually a process that starts with your bank. And your bank would receive those deposits into maybe a typical lockbox where payments are sent to a PO box, or maybe it's just the deposits for that day that they've recorded. But the bank is typically the one generating the file. That file that the bank generates could be a CSV format, could be an XLSX format, or any other format that they can provide you. Now that file itself is not directly importable into SXE CSD. So we'll kind of keep talking about CSD, but really we mean the entire family, if you will. Usually there's a third party involved that takes whatever file that the bank can produce for you and map it into the format that CSD can consume. Now, when we're talking CSD, there's actually two formats that CSD can consume. One is the original EDI 820N flat file format. And then the other is the new kind of XML bod that CSD works off of for many of the EDI or legacy EDI processes. The whole point of the Lockbox remittance process is to help minimize manual keystrokes for your AR team. So if a check comes in, the remittance matches everything that's open, it can post right on through without any manual interaction. Or if there is a invoice that's already been paid that's on the remittance, or something's not identified correctly, it can be addressed within an exception center in the entry. So the idea is that you're getting to a point of just dealing with exceptions, and everything else that matches doesn't need manual attention. If it's organized well, it can actually make bank reconciliation a little bit easier, because if your lockbox deposit happens to be one big lump sum, right, your journal could potentially be one big lump sum. And so then when you go to reconcile, possibly in Check Reconciliation Center, the CREC, it'll be one deposit to check off. So a lot of benefits there. Now, I talked about two different methods of importing into CSD, the EDI 820N and the XML BOD. There's some pros and cons to both. The EDI 820N continues to allow a batch processing, if you will. So I could have one EDI file that's representative of one lockbox batch that might be multiple checks posting to multiple invoices and multiple customers. But the point is, I could have 50 checks in a batch, and that one batch ends up on one journal altogether. One lockbox file, one batch, one journal. When you go to the XML side of things, the way that it handles it is actually one check per BOD, for the XML BOD, business object document, one BOD or one batch per BOD. So this does alter the way that Lockbox posts, in the sense that I might have that same 50 check batch that I could handle in one flat file on one journal is now 50 BODs, potentially 50 different journals for that day. So that's something to keep in mind. There are some processes that we can set up to work around that, and so that you get one deposit entry into your main bank account. You could set up a Lockbox bank, if you will, CRSB record, bank setup record, and have all the individual transactions flow in there, and then do one journal entry from that kind of temporary bank into your main bank account for easier reconciliation. But if we go with the flat file method, everything should be coming in how the bank is depositing it, and we wouldn't have the need for that secondary bank. The other big difference between the two processing is that with the EDI format, with the EDI flat file, we would have to go through the processes that are similar to what they would be in graphical, in the sense that we have to manually import that file. So the flat file would be put into a folder. In CloudSuite distribution, we can use the file transfer administrator to bring that file from our desktop or some network folder into the cloud. And then we would run ARELI, the Lockbox import process. And that would kick off the batch creation, and let's see what our exceptions are and what posts and the whole process. So some manual touching there. Some pros to that is that I'm controlling when this posts. I'm controlling when, I'm not on top of each other, two different people posting different Lockbox batches. It's a very controlled environment because I have to kick it off manually. Now with the XML BOD process, you basically set up a data connection that says look to a particular folder, and when that file is dropped into that folder, potentially by a company like Unilink, they would convert the file coming from the bank, drop it in a folder, CSD goes, oh, I got an XML BOD, and brings it in automatically. So there's no further need to actually manually run the import process. There's no file transfer that has to be run. There's no manual ARELI Lockbox process. So that's a great thing because we're trying to get rid of the manual keystrokes, right? But that is really subject to whenever the file is dropped into the folder. So you could have these Lockbox postings happening all day long. So we did talk a little bit about the one check per BOD, one BOD per batch with the XML versus the other with the flat file. Now, I will say, I try to keep the editorial out of it, but being an accountant myself, I am still kind of near and dear and part and parcel to having that control over when things post, and having that larger journal, having all my journals post by batch, and having that easier reconciliation to the bank. But time marches on, we have some new technology, and we learn how to use it. So both ways are good, and both ways have their pros and cons. Now I'm going to kind of look away from the team here as I'm working with my screen, so I do apologize. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the setups that are involved with the Lockbox process. There aren't many, but there's a few to consider. First things first is in the administrator options, in customers, and in cash receipts. There is an option here for the paid in full. Now this paid in full field in itself is not just limited to the Lockbox process. It is a company-wide setting of what's acceptable for a write-off, right? It's a company-wide setting for what's acceptable in tendering as well for the write-off. But where it becomes important, where we start to add the Lockbox into this process, is that this dollar amount is now the threshold that the Lockbox process will use if you allow it to do write-offs. So if you're using this currently right now as kind of like the overall, hey, you know, in general, we allow people to have $99 ability to write off an ARECE in the cash receipt entry. You probably want to bring this number down to what you would allow the system to write off automatically if you allow that in the process, as we'll see. And then go into SASO, into the operator setup, and set up the operators with a larger amount if that is needed. So you want to bring this amount down so you're not letting the system have a $99 write-off as well. So that paid in full allowance amount. Once you get past that, there are records that they call the Lockbox setup records. Now the first thing that has to be set up before you get any payments in is the Lockbox for your dummy customer. So you do have to set up, well, they call it a dummy customer. I like to label it as an unknown deposits customer. And it's basically just a customer record like any other, except it's an internal customer, right? So like I said, I like to name it, you know, unknown deposits versus a dummy customer. And then I also like to set this customer up to no sales allowed, because I don't want anybody in order entry to be able to post anything to this customer. Everything that we would ever need to do to the balance on this customer would be through the AR module. So by setting it to no sales orders allowed, no sales allowed, you can't do anything in order entry. So once you have your unknown deposits customer set up, this customer, what this is it's a catch-all. So there's a system of checks that the process will go through when the remittance is received. If there's a matching lockbox number, which we'll talk about here in a second, it'll find the customer that way. If there's not, then it looks to the transactions that are on the remittance. And it'll go out and try to find the invoice number and the customer number that it's assigned to. If there's no transactions, or it can't find the transactions, and there's no lockbox, then the system goes, okay, you know what? I have no idea what to do with this. So I'm going to put it as unapplied cash in your dummy customer until you tell me what to do with it. So you have to have this customer set up for the lockbox process, because it's kind of like the suspense GL. It's just system doesn't know what to do. That's its last resort. But generally speaking, the balance on this customer should be very, very low or very, very few, because you should be monitoring this customer, correcting as quickly as possible any unapplied cash that does get to this customer's account. So once I have the customer record set up, I can set up a lockbox record for it. And the lockbox record, like I said, is just one of those layers that the system can determine what customer a payment is for. A lot of times, because your bank only knows what's on the check, that lockbox number may be a MICR/accounting number, account number from the bottom of the check, because the bank isn't going to know that, you know, your customer is the numbers or what the payment is really for. They're not going to know the invoice, the customers that the invoices are under. So we look for some piece of information that would be identifiable by the bank that we can kind of connect here in CSD. And so I've got a couple here just as examples. If you have other numbers, that's fine. They don't have to be the account and the MICR number, but the bank would have to have record or some sort of table or something to connect the two. But that account / MICR number seems to work really well as a good unique number. And you can have a customer that has multiple lockboxes. Maybe they have a couple different branches that they pay out of, or a couple different accounts that they pay out of, and that's perfectly fine, but I can't have it the other way around. You don't have one lockbox for multiple customers. So it's a unique identifier. And then that way too, if you have a payment that comes in that has a valid lockbox number, but for whatever reason there's no transactions, it knows exactly what customer to go for the implied cash as opposed to dumping it in your lockbox dummy customer. So kind of a nice little check there. And then these lockbox numbers can be created on the fly. So if you don't necessarily want to monitor when new numbers come across and you just want the system to say, oh, this is a new ARSL, find the customer number and create the ARSL for future, you absolutely have the option to do that in the import that we'll see in a little bit here. Otherwise, if you would rather keep it a little more controlled, you can tell the system, no, do not auto-create the lockbox numbers. And if it runs into a new lockbox number, it will fail the import until you go create that lockbox number. So a little point of control there. All right. So now on the customer record, so I shut that, I didn't mean to. On the customer record itself, I'll just pick one here. There is also, under credit, because I always forget where it is, and all the way down here, kind of in the credit area, but there is a box here for lockbox post types. Now, most general remittances will have the invoice number specified, right? What invoices they're paying, what credits they're taking, discounts that they're taking, usually that's specified. But you do have kind of another layer of application here. So if you have a customer who pays by statement balance, and they don't really send a remittance with all the invoices and everything that was on that statement, you can set the customer itself to say, we're going to pay by the statement balance. And so when that payment comes in without any transactions on it, it says, oh, it's for customer number 5. I have no transactions. It looks at the customer record and says they want to try to do the statement balance. And so then it tries to match the statement balance that was last recorded. Likewise, you can do oldest to newest or a total balance of the account. So that's kind of a catch-all application, if you will. They're not required by any means. You can just leave it as blank, and then that payment will not try to auto-apply in any way. It'll just sit there and wait for you to tell it, yep, send it as unapplied cash, or we can adjust the transaction remittance in the lockbox entry, which we'll see here in a bit. That's a nice little thing there. And that's really it as far as the setups go for the admin options and the customers and those lockbox setups. From there, it's all about the process. So let's go into the import process. So the program that brings the files into CSD, whether we are doing the EDI 820N or whether we're using XML BOD, both are going to use the Lockbox import process, the ARELI process, and options and ranges therein. So if I just show you what's going on here, there's no ranges to it. It's looking for a particular file. So usually the files are named lbx.in or lbx1.in. They could be ach.in. Whatever you want to name them as, you can have separate ARELI jobs. But this is the program that's going to control how automated or how manual you want this lockbox process to be. And so if I just want to, post whatever can actually post, and I'll deal with just the exceptions, then we start to flip some of these flags. So number 3 here, if I just want to bring them in and I want to look at them all before I post them, then I leave this as no, and I'm going to be able to look at every single batch that comes in. In fact, I'll leave it as no today so we can see those batches come in. But I can look at those batches and then I can decide when I'm ready to run the update. But if I'm doing this and want to be more exception-based processing, then I can say yes to number 3 here. And generally speaking, I say yes to number 4 because those batches that come in will either be ready or not ready. And what ready means is everything matches, the system can find the invoices just fine, or it knows how it needs to apply based on the customer record if it doesn't have any invoices on it, and that check is ready to go. You wouldn't have to manually touch it in any way. And if that's the case, the batch is ready. And if the batch is ready and we have number 3 set to yes, then it will go ahead and post and update that batch and update the GL and update the customer's account. If there is something that the system cannot identify, or when we start to bring in the questions about write-offs, right? If the customer is short paying by a certain amount, if they're within that $3, are we going to do an automatic write-off? If they're outside of the $3 that we had set in AO, do we want it to do a partial payment? So there's decisions that we can let this import do to help make this process, less manual or more controlled, either way. The other things is if a check goes to the dummy customer, right? Do I want to force that batch to be ready and just let it go and I'll deal with it after the fact? Generally speaking, I don't recommend to force batches unsuspended. Generally speaking, it's easier to try to update it in Lockbox entry than to worry about having to go back after the fact. But all these questions work in conjunction with each other. If we are going to post, or try to post anyways, during the import process, what bank do we want to post it to? So the import itself, the entire batch, the entire file that's coming in would post all to the same bank. There are ways to automate things that if you had multiple banks, different banks, you want to direct payments differently, that's absolutely possible by different ARELI jobs. The Lockbox process does not look to the customer record for the bank to post to like it would in cash receipt entry, just manual entry. It looks to either the import job here or the update job if we're posting separately. Then we also get to specify what our dummy customer is, our unknown deposits customer. That has to be specified. If we don't have that, we can't post. Kind of like if we don't have suspense accounts identified in the company setup, you can't post. The system has to have that catch-all. The Lockbox import does support split payments. So if you have a customer who sends one check but may have remittance across multiple customer records, you absolutely can do that with the Lockbox import process. That's not a problem. And the system actually allows you to either let those go through, or if you want to look at them before they do, you can set the system to suspend those particular checks that cross over multiple customer records. That allows you the ability to potentially put the unapplied cash to a specific customer, or just fix it if you don't think it's right. You have the ability to stop those. Then we have those write-off questions that we were talking about just a moment ago. So whether or not we want to allow the system to do automatic write-offs within that $3 threshold, excuse me, that we set up on the AO. Or if you're not comfortable with the system doing that at all, you can say no to this. And then any short pay or overpay, regardless of whether it's in that $3 or not, will suspend the transaction and require you to basically mark it okay if you want to go ahead and write it off. If you do want to enact those write-offs, do you want to set up partial pays if they're outside the limit? Usually I think this is going to be yes, because I don't want the system just writing off anything and everything it could. I want it to go ahead and do a partial pay, and maybe I don't really want to take a look at it. But if you don't want to allow partial pays and you want to take a look at it every time, you can always set this to no. The Lockbox records, we talked about setting those up some of them you might know ahead of time. Most of them you probably won't. So you can have this set to yes to create those lockbox records. When you get those new checks from your customers, maybe they opened up a new account, it'll create those records on the fly, just letting you know, hey, we found this invoice for customer number 5. You don't have a lockbox number set up, so it sets up that ARSL record for future transactions. If you say no to that, then of course it stops the import and lets you know which ones don't have a lockbox. And then posting date and posting period that's used if we have number 3 set to yes. So like I said, there's a multitude of combinations that you could do with these options that controls how manual this process might be or how automatic this process might be. You get to play with those settings as you test through. Now, if I don't update an ARELI, I do have the ability to update and run the update job manually. We'll take a really quick peek at it here. That is the ARELU, which is the lockbox update. That's the process the system is running if I do post upon import. There's really nothing to it. I can specify a batch range. I can do it in edit mode just to look to see if there's any errors, or I can go ahead and do it in update mode, tell it the bank number, and go ahead and post it. But that's the process that updates the GL and the customer records for this whole program. So let's go ahead and there's a couple of other functions we're going to look through here. Obviously, ARELE, the lockbox entry, is very important to us because that's where we can manually touch those transactions if we need to. So I have a few files here that I will show you. One is an example of the remittance advice BOD, the XML BOD, just to kind of show you here. I am not going to be using the BODs for the imports today because it's easier to import a flat file on the fly. But just to kind of give you an idea what it looks like, it's got the lockbox number, the dates, the amount, but it is one check per BOD. Versus the flat files that I've got 3 queued up here for our demo today. One that has 4 checks in it, one that has 1 check in it, and another that has 3. So I've got 3 batches, 3 groups to bring in, and even one with a credit in it. So this does support both invoices and credits. Go ahead and pop back in. Now, working with the cloud, I do have to use the file transfer administrator, SAFT, to bring it from my desktop into the cloud. So I'll get my lockbox file 1, transfer file, pull in my lockbox file 2, transfer the file, and lastly, the lockbox file 3, and transfer the file. So now it's gone from the desktop up into the cloud, and now I would run the lockbox import. Now again, if this were using the XML BOD, we would have an job, an ARELI job out here to tell the system what parameters we want to use when we're bringing in these files. But since I am doing it through the EDI file, it is a manual import. So I'm going to adjust my file name here. I'm not going to post anything here because I want to show you those batches. I'll do my lockbox 1. Copy one time. We'll do lockbox 2 and lockbox 3. Pretty easy process. Even if you choose to do this manual process, not a big deal to do. Lockbox 3. Okay. And then so what happens here is we do get some reports that tell us what's happening with those files. If I open up one of my reports here, you'll see, there we go, there's our options. And if I scroll down here, you can see that in this particular lockbox import, it found an invalid MICR. So that's the lockbox number, the ARSL, and it went ahead and created it for me. Let's see, another one's here. This was my Lockbox 1 file. A few more checks on it. Whoops, too far. I can see, oh, yep, it found this customer just fine, no messages. This one here, hey, that's the same customer as my other one, but a different maker number, so that's okay. And then I also have one here where it says, well, we couldn't determine what the customer was, so because there were no transactions. So here it did use customer 999, my dummy customer. Now you can look at these reports to look at your errors, or you can maintain this all in the system. All the batches have come in. If I look at the batch maintenance entry, which is ARELB, if you're playing the acronym game, I can see my 3 batches. Notice 2 of them have check marks and 1 does not. That's the ready status. That's my way of knowing that everything that came through in batch 2 and batch 3 matched. There's nothing the system asks of me anymore for those batches. If I wanted to go run ARELU and post the update, and I say ready only batches or only ready batches, I should say, those 2 would post right through fine because they are ready to go. But I do have one here that is not. It has some questions. I can't do anything from this screen except remove a batch. So if something was really hosed with one of these batches, I could delete the batch. You know, I could go fix the original file if I needed to, or if I found this was a duplicate batch for some reason, I could delete the file. But there's no other maintenance that can happen from this screen. It's just purely an informational screen within CSD. Where I get to do my maintenance is the Lockbox entry. And it's a little bit different if you've ever seen it in the graphical environment. The setup and the way that you work with the Lockbox entry is a little bit different. Your best bet is to work out of the lookups and always start with the batch number. So if I hit the lookup table here on batch, and I do it one more time, and I click search, I know that my batch 1 is not ready. So I can hit batch number here and click search, and it shows me the 4 checks that were included in this batch. Notice 2 of the checks, perfectly fine. Everything matched, the system has no questions. But I do have 2 checks here that are not ready, that are waiting for me to tell the system that it's either ready, right, force it ready, go ahead and post it to that dummy customer, or for me to go ahead and manually adjust it. And this is all before these payments hit the customer's accounts. So nothing has actually posted yet. So let's say I want to work with this particular check here. I'm going to go ahead and click on that and click search. And it brings me into the details. So it's telling me, hey, we're putting it to the Lockbox dummy customer, the unknown customer. And if I were to mark this payment ready and I were to post it, it would post unapplied cash to that unknown customer. But it just so happens that I went back to my bank and I went back to the images of my checks, and I know exactly where that was supposed to have gone. Maybe the bank typed a bad number from the check remittance, or maybe I just recognize the customer based off the image of the check. I can make those changes here before they get posted, and that way I don't have to go deal with unapplied cash on my unknown customer. So if I know a customer but I don't know a transaction, I have a few options up here. I can come up here into the more, and I can actually change my customer number if I wanted to. And by looking at my fake PDF, right, I noticed that, oh yeah, that was for my customer number 103. And what that does is that allows me to change the customer noted to the payment so that if I still want to post unapplied cash, maybe that customer didn't have any outstanding invoices, this unapplied cash would now post to 103 and be under the proper customer instead of under the Lockbox dummy customer, the unknown deposit customer. But I just so happen to know that this customer does have an invoice that's outstanding too. So I can remove the detail that came in with the check. Notice my proof comes back out. And I can add transactions from the customer's account. So these are open transactions on the customer. I can pull in miscellaneous credits that might be open. I can add a debit memo just like I can in cash receipt entry manually. but I can also pull in open scheduled payments. So if I click on that, you do always get a warning that talks about the audit trail and what came in. And yeah, I know I want to destroy it because it's not right. And so it comes in filtered or searched on the customer that your payment is under. And here I can see, oh yeah, they do have one invoice open. Hey, look at that. It's for the amount of our payment. That's the one I need to bring into my remittance. If I had multiple out here, I could definitely select multiple to bring into the remittance as well. But I only have the one. And I click OK. And now I've replaced the detail that came in from the import with the actual information of where this check needs to go, so that when I post this, I won't have to go touch it after the fact. It's done, it's ready. I click Save. And then I move on to my next check. Back into my batch. I could go into batch 001, or I can just click search from here as well. And I can see, here's batch 1, ready, ready, ready. Oh, that one's not ready. I can even see batch 3, that's ready. 3, 3, ready, ready. Okay. So let's go back into our check that's not ready. And you just work those that are not ready. Click search. And in this particular case, I don't think it gives me, nope, doesn't give me the message over here. But in this particular case, the total invoice that the system has pulled in, that it sees for invoice 100056802, the total invoice is for $6,188.05. The customer is only remitting and paying $6,000. That's outside of my paid in full, right? That's outside of my paid in full threshold. Definitely, I don't want to write off $188, but the system's waiting because I said no to those partial payments on my default settings for ARELI. The system's waiting for me to tell it that that's okay, because maybe there's a miscellaneous credit that should have been brought in, right, for $188.05 that the client or the customer did not put on the remittance. In this case, I'm all right with short paying it. I go ahead and I mark that transaction as ready to process. Now that particular invoice is ready to process, and that will make the entire batch ready to process, just because all the transactions on it are ready. So now all 3 of my batches are ready. Now, one thing I did want to show you here, if I have the right file, I think this is Lockbox 2. Oh, no. Let's see. Lockbox 2. Apparently I had a batch in there and done messed myself up. Let's see. So we will grab, there should be a Lockbox 2. There we go. Nope. It captured a batch from earlier, so I apologize. It didn't bring in my other batch. But there was one here where I was going to show you the difference between the write-off and the paid in full. I do apologize. 3, 2, there we go. That's what I wanted. So I'll show you this because it's arguing with me. But this was a check that the customer was remitting $74. And in one invoice, they were remitting $24 for an invoice that was $24.56 total. And in the other one, they were remitting $50 for an invoice that was 60 something or other, but way short paying it. And in this particular case, the system was going to be just fine with writing off the 56 cents because that was within our $3 threshold. And that particular import, I allowed that. And in this one, because it would have been outside of the threshold, it would suspend that transaction. So you get that ability to see the difference and be able to stop it. You can do the write-offs in ARELE if needed, or you can mark it and have it go through as a partial pay. Basically, what I'm trying to instill is that anything you can do in cash receipt entry, right? Debit memos for credits taken twice, adding miscellaneous credits to the remittance if needed, changing the invoices that came through on the remittance. You can do all that within the Lockbox entry before those transactions get posted. And obviously you can leave unapplied cash. So it's not a bad place to work, and that becomes your work center instead of cash receipt entry. So let's see here, where did I leave off? So now I have 3 batches ready to post. I can go ahead and run update manually on them now, which is the ARELU. Let's do, actually, grab that. I'm gonna go ahead and leave my batch range wide open because I wanna try to update them all. Put it into update mode, post ready only, sure thing, into bank number 1. And so that's the process that's going to call out and go ahead and post the transactions, update the customer's accounts, update the general ledger, and of course, dump those deposits into the check center entry if we are reconciling our bank through CR module. So if I come in here and I hit deposit and I click search, there are my deposits. And notice how ARELU shows up with the ARELU reference, letting you know those were, not manually, those were imported files through the Lockbox process, versus the cash rec journals, which are those that are still posted through ARECE, the cash receipt entry, manually. So you have those to mark off for your bank reconciliation. Lastly, on the customer account, everything's going to look just the same except for those references in the module that it's coming from. So let's see, let's pick on number 4. Transactions, and we'll look at both because I don't think he's got too many. Oh, I lied, he got a lot, didn't he? Let's see, find my check record. There we go. Invoice date will be today. And so this top guy here, this top record, is our check record. And again, you can see that reference of ARELU, just letting you know that that came in through the Lockbox import versus cash receipt journals coming through ARECE. And in a nutshell, that's pretty much all there is to it. I'd say the hardest thing about implementing the Lockbox process itself has to be trying to figure out how you get that file converted from what the bank is able to provide you versus what CSD can consume. Once you have that, it's just a matter of deciding how much control or how much autonomy you want the Lockbox import process to have. So hopefully that whets your appetite for some of this technology that's available to you. And Julie, I think now I'll open it up for any questions here.
Right, I don't see anything in the chat or the questions area. If there is anything, if you want to, I can unmute the lines for everybody and just see if there's any questions anyone wants to ask before we end for the day. So I have unmuted the participants. Okay, I don't hear anything. So we do have some people who are self-muted, but oh, here's a question that came in. Do banks charge a fee to do this?
Good question. You have to check bank by bank. I know some banks will. Back in my, what I like to call my functional accounting days, our bank did charge a fee, and they actually charged a fee by keystroke. So there's definitely the possibility of fees from the bank to produce the file. And then there's probably some sort of cost component with the third-party company that would be required to translate the file into either the EDI 820N flat file or the XML BOD. But those should be relatively minor, especially if that client is already, if you're already working with other documents for import processes and export processes. But definitely check with your bank.
Right, right. And on Central Data's part, if you are interested in pursuing a project to add Lockbox functionality, you can just submit that to our support@centraldata.com email, and we'll assign a resource to work with you directly, and we can give you more information there. I don't see anything else, Anna. So thank you so much for doing this today. I will be sending out the recording to everyone who attended. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time. Oh, I see one more question come in. Hold on. One more.
All right, not going anywhere.
Okay. All right. If a check comes in and should be posted to a general ledger account, can you post it through this process?
That's a really good question. I don't believe you can, actually. I think it's all, I'll have to follow up on that one. Okay. I'm not recalling an option to do the miscellaneous cash like you can in cash receipt entry. One option would be to go ahead and post it to the unknown deposits account, and then you would post an ARET invoice to offset it and go to the right GL account that you would want it to hit. But I don't believe there is an actual miscellaneous cash from the Lockbox entry ARELE. So there, you see, I lied. I said you could do anything in ARECE and ARELE, and that might be the one thing you can't do.
Okay. And Jackie has another question as well. What is the threshold number of checks a day would benefit from this?
Well, that all depends on how much your bank would charge you, versus plus any costs incurred in the translation of the file. So giving you kind of an ROI number is difficult. Obviously, if you only have maybe 50 checks a day, I probably wouldn't be considering this as much as maybe 200 checks a day. But if you're looking to get more autonomy and maybe have fewer I would say manual people, but manual postings, it really is a business by business, bank by bank kind of decision.
And the other comment here is, thank you, Anna is the best.
Well, wherever that came from, that
was from Jackie as well.
Oh, Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, we appreciate your business, and thank you so much for attending today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much, everyone.